Hi, welcome back to the Mob Mentality Show. My name is Austin Chadwick and co-host is Chris Lucian. And very excited today to have Daniel Vacanti joining us on the show. We're going to hit some fun, exciting topics, including predictability, metrics, forecasting, Kanban, and maybe anything in Agile. We'll see where we land before jumping into that, Daniel, do you mind giving an introduction for yourself?
Hello everyone. I just want to say thanks so much for the invitation to be here. Glad to be part of the show. Hopefully we'll have a little bit of fun. I go back in my my career too long. I don't like to talk about too long, but I can say I got my start programming in C, if that dates me at all. But over the years crossed over to management and especially agile management and things like that. But the last 15 years or so have been focused mostly on on Kanban and the metrics and predictability side of Kanban, which I think we're going to talk a lot about today. So I don't know, that's my story in 25 words or less. I hope that does a good enough job.
Okay. No, that's awesome. We could have tweeted that. That was the sufficient number of characters. Perfect. All right on. Yeah, so what you been thinking about lately on predictability?
Anything and anything, but mostly around just how badly it's done in Agile, how badly it's talked about in Agile. We were talking before we hit the record button. We were talking about how I'm becoming quite the curmudgeon in my old age, and I really just like to complain. But so much of Agile, I think, wants to sweep the idea of predictability under the rug. We don't like to talk about that. Agile. Which is unfortunate because that's really all our customers care to talk about. And it's reasonable for them. It's reasonable for our customers to care about predictability. It's perfectly reasonable. Why would they spend money? Why would they invest in projects? Why would they start any project unless they have some idea of, duration and cost and all of those things. So, hopefully we'll get into it, but the elephant in the room that we need to talk about is how we think about predictability. I think needs to change. I think what most agilists rail against is traditional ways of thinking about predictability, and there are different ways to think about predictability, which is what I've been focusing on the past several years.
Nice, yeah. And I think I guess I'll share a bit. Once I started doing extreme programming, mob programming, test-driven development, and Kanban, I kind of jumped into an environment where we did all those things. One really fantastic side effect, even though we weren't giving estimates, was that we were very predictable, I guess, from the outside, right? It was just like every day was a stream of value, like we were delivering daily to production. And I've always loved that as a nice side effect of like a healthy team. And it's one thing that numbers and that kind of stuff is an area of learning and growth for me. But one thing I can attest to is that it's something that the customers, whether internal or external, can feel, right? Is that, oh, this team is very predictable in their ability to generate value or run experiments on the market. And and I just love seeing that side effect. It's almost fun to come into a team that is not predictable in that way, and start delivering daily and see the trust increase because of that. I don't know, what's your experience been in this world?
Well, no, I'm glad you brought up the term customer, because I think that's the most important factor. When we talk about predictability, we need to talk about it in the language of the customer, and we need to talk about it from the perspective of the customer. Like you said, how they experience it. We can't go around making up stuff like, and I don't want to drag us down into the whole story points thing, but we can't go around, making up random stuff like story points or, really arbitrary, and I would say even grotesque estimation techniques and things like that. That's like you said, that our customers cannot relate to that. So anything that we can do to, like I said, put this in the context of the customer, so they can relate to what we're talking about. That's where we're going to be successful. And as much as we can make it experiential, as you said, as much as they can feel it, as much as they can touch it, as much as it's tangible for them, then we'll really, really be successful.
So do you have any, I guess, techniques or things that you'd tell people worked for you and or other people that you've worked with? What does it look like to go from the intangible, hard to understand to the concrete and understandable?
Yeah, see, and that's where that's where I wish I had a great answer for that. And I always tell people, if I had a specific answer to that question, as much as I love coming on these shows, as much as I love talking to people, I wouldn't be. I'd be on a beach counting all my money somewhere.
There you
Right?
go.
I wouldn't be doing that, right? But I think for me, it starts with, first of all, getting people to understand that there is no such thing as determinism in our world. It just does not exist. Deterministic thinking, you got to check that at the door. And when I mean deterministic thinking, I mean thinking in terms of 100%. There's no certainty, right? As both of you know, our world is dominated by uncertainty. And the second uncertainty enters in the equation, then you have to start taking a probabilistic approach and not a deterministic one.
Yeah.
So first and foremost is kind of making that switch over to, there's no 100% right answer, there's no 100% wrong answer, right? But there's degrees of risk in between those two outcomes, and being able to be able to quantify that risk. This is another thing I think that our customers really care about, is really understanding risk. Being able to quantify that risk, quantify that uncertainty, and make it visible, make it transparent to the customer, so we can have that real conversation about what outcomes they're looking for. That's, I think, where the conversation needs to start. So, and we can dive deeper into some techniques that you might come up with to quantify all of that uncertainty, but it has to start there. Now, at the risk of rambling a little bit too much, that's usually where I lose the customers, because they're always like, just give me a date. Why can't you just give me a date? And so that's why that's where some discussion needs to happen around, well, I can give you a date, but the better answer is, you tell me what date you want, and I will tell you what your chances of hitting that date. Right?
Okay, the probability driven approach. So is that sort of like Monte Carlo simulation or something along those lines, or is it in a different direction?
No, most definitely. Monte Carlo simulation is an approach. It's not the only approach, but it is an approach. But just understanding, I would say, variability in data in general. But yes, the path that you're talking about, is there a way that we can use the past data that we've collected off of our process to help predict what those future outcomes might be? But absolutely, Monte Carlo simulation might be one of those techniques. Hopefully it is one of those techniques.
And then I hear a lot of single sizing, or basically going down to the smallest common denominator piece, and then breaking down tasks and then counting up those tasks and things as well. There's also the just simple cost of delay prioritization without duration, and because it's funny, because I think a lot of people out there spend so much time trying to figure out when they can make the product that they never make it. And so there's also that piece of it. I guess where do you see, so I think one thing that I've often stumbled on in the past is the interpretation of those numbers varies across large organizations, and sometimes that misinterpretation, things become, first they start with being a prediction with a probability, and gradually they migrate their way to a reason for blame and like the fundamental attribution error. Do you have any advice for people that run into those sorts of things?
I mean, not really, unfortunately. The thing is, so I'm a big fan of Annie Duke. Whenever this type of topic comes up, I don't know if you're both familiar with Annie Duke. She's an ex-professional poker player. She's written a couple books. And she talks about how most people correlate good outcomes with good decisions and bad outcomes with bad decisions. And the thing is, you can make all the right decisions, all along the process, like you're talking about, Chris, and still have a bad outcome. Like, we missed the date. The project wasn't successful. The product wasn't as valuable as we thought it was, whatever, right? But that doesn't necessarily mean you're wrong. You just got unlucky, right? And that's possible. And so that's why whenever people start trying to play the blame game, I think it's important to kind of focus back on, well, what was our decision-making process all along? And was that decision-making sound? Was there different data that we should have looked at? Was there, context that we ignored, whatever? And I think there are a lot of examples out there that kind of help with that. One of my favorites, and anybody who's kind of seen the stuff I do before, one of my favorites is, comparing, how they forecast hurricanes. I live in South Florida, so, I care about how hurricanes are forecast. And, if you look at the science of how they forecast hurricanes, no one ever goes back and blames the why can't even
meteorologist?
Yeah, but the government agency, NOAA, but a National Hurricane Center. God, I don't know why I drew a complete blank on that. No one goes back and blames the National Hurricane Center because, oh, hey, the hurricane changed path, whatever. I mean, that's just kind of the way complex systems work. Now, the question is, once you get that signal that it's changing path, what do you do? That's, to me, that's the more interesting conversation. But anyway, that's that. The blame game absolutely is dangerous, and
so maybe pulling back to the point where, training people on a team about complex adaptive systems so that the probability or the elaboration on the numbers related to the probabilities understood from that perspective may be a first step, and then so something along those lines, and then I'm sure that Kanban has a lot to do with predictability in general, but So
it's not only taking a step back and understanding those numbers, but it's also the responsibility to update those predictions as you get more information, right? We can do all that, and this is not to bash Scrum too much, but I think this is the kind of the trap that a lot of Scrum teams fall into, is they think the planning, sprint planning is only done at the beginning of the sprint. And then, we got the plan, we got to have the plan, we got to work the plan, that's a plan, and that's a plan, we got to do the plan, right? That's I think how a lot of quote unquote agile teams think. And that's honestly not how Scrum's supposed to work, right? Every day you're supposed to
waterfall.
You're supposed to inspect, and you're supposed to update that plan as you get new information. So I think that's the second piece, is not only understand that there's uncertainty, but certainly you have the ability and the responsibility to update your forecast as you get new information. We call that continuous forecasting, just so you know.
Continuous forecasting. Okay, I'm gonna write that down. Continuous forecasting. I like that.
Hashtag
continuous forecasting. Boom. So and I really like this analogy of the hurricane, and I think like forecasting that is much more attuned to what it's like to forecast a complex software development process or whatever. And but I think in a lot of people's minds it's like in the same category as making burgers, right? And so it's just like, why can't you forecast this? Go ahead.
And so I was just gonna say, if you've ever been in a project that's chaotic and going off the rails, it feels like you're in the middle of a hurricane, doesn't it? I mean, that's what it really that's what it feels like, right?
Certainly.
It's a good analogy on several fronts there. And it reminded me of one quote from the book Thinking Fast and Slow, and it was talking about fields that kind of deal with this kind of thing, but unfortunately the market doesn't appreciate it. The quote is, "Experts who acknowledge the full extent of their ignorance may expect to be replaced by more confident competitors who are better able to gain the trust of their clients. An unbiased appreciation of uncertainty is the cornerstone of rationality, but it is not what people and organizations want." And so and I guess the question is, we've been kind of tackling it a little bit, but I kind of ask it to both of you, because I've seen Chris do this as well. Recently, Chris and I were working together, and I overheard how he was talking with another part of the organization that's more business minded, and he was phrasing the work we were doing as far as bets. Like, okay, imagine you go to the casino and every day they're making a bet on how to solve this problem, because we were dealing with a very a piece of R&D that was a lot of unknowns, just like a very high list of unknowns. And so we really didn't know what we don't know. And we're just running experiments every day to figure it out. I guess maybe a question to both of you: how do you help change the language from certainty to uncertainty, from non-betting commitment language to betting language? I don't know, like when you're working with leaders.
Chris, do you want to go first on that one?
Yeah,
that's a complex question.
yeah.
Well, so I think a long time ago I read The Power of Habit, and one thing that really stuck with me, I think, is like chapter 8 in that book. So like everything is about like your own personal habits in that book, except chapter 8 is like, and I might be wrong on the number, but it's on organizational habits, right? And it's like a cue, a habit, a reward. And I think, like, that's like maybe the first step in kind of elaborating on the system and getting people to understand that, like, a cue might be you're asked for an estimate, and then the habit is to like do some of the work, and then the reward only comes if like you did it within the time box that the estimate was given. And then all of a sudden, like, that cue, habit, reward cycle gradually degrades your ability to produce work, because either you underestimate it and you're going to do a quality sabotage to the project by asking for that stuff, or you're going to go the opposite direction and overestimate the time, but that means that you can pay down some of the technical debt that you accumulated before, and it kind of becomes like a Parkinson's law gets involved too. And so I went from kind of getting more discussion around organizational habits, talking about uncertainty, like bets, and using the term bet, I think, is really good, especially from like a product ownership standpoint. And then gradually getting into like the effects of complex adaptive systems. And it's like that habit loop for the organization is one of many complex adaptive systems that are basically they're acting as balancing loops on quality and things along those lines. And so when you combine all of it, but also there's turnover in the organization, and that turnover, people come in with ideas that stuff is still good, and so when they come into the organization, they have the original perspective. So it's a treadmill of like of re-educating, of change, shifting perspective, and those sorts of things. I find that ends up being a common motif. I don't know, Daniel, if you have more to that.
Yeah, no, I mean, I just want to double down, really. We were just talking about Annie Duke, and her I think it was her first book. Is literally called Thinking in Bets. And so that's what I started doing. I just started handing out that book when we started talking about how do we get people to embrace uncertainty. It's like, and same with you. It's like for that book, most people probably really only need to read chapters 1, 2, and 6. Really, I was like, here, just read those, and then let's talk. But you really need to think like a poker player. That's absolutely what you need to do, and think about the habits of poker players. For those of you who are familiar with like, say, Texas Hold'em, a poker player doesn't sit down at a table and think, okay, first hand, I'm going to go all in, right? I mean, unless it's obviously the absolute perfect hand, which never happens, right? The idea of playing poker is to see as many hands as you can, right? The longer, because the idea is to sit at the table for as long as possible, right? That's what you want to do. So they've got this concept called bankroll management, and it's like, what's the absolute smallest bet that I can place, to be able to get more information? How do I place a small bet to get more information? And like I said, they call that bankroll management. And like I said, it's the same thing with product ownership.
Yeah.
You talked about like cost of delay and stuff like that before. I cringe. I cringe when I hear prioritization techniques like that, because so many people think that they understand value up front, they understand duration up front, they understand all. And the thing is, you don't. You don't have a clue. You might think that you do, but you don't. So the question is, what's the smallest bet that we can place to find out if what we think is right? And more often than not, you're gonna be wrong. My friend Pratik Singh, who co-hosts the Drunk Agile thing that maybe we're going to talk about a little bit later, he likes to say, the trick to Agile, the idea behind Agile, is to find out how wrong you are as quickly as possible.
Yeah. Totally agree with that. And yeah, so there's definitely like an organizational habit space, and so cost of delay. So how can you know cost of delay? You really can't, right? But you have an expectation of where that might be, and so thin vertical slices based on cost of delay. That cost of delay technically should be what will give you more information about exposing more information about the market, right?
So believe it or not, Pratik and I we did a whole bunch of research on this, and we ran a bunch of simulations. And what we found out was that because you don't know value up front, because you don't know cost of delay up front, you're actually much better off just choosing the work you do at random rather than trying to prioritize based on cost of delay. You'll have a much better chance of success, and we can put the reference to the paper that we wrote up on this if anybody's interested.
So I love that point. So how would you, like, in practice, right? So obviously, I think most organizations and anybody with the ability to fund a project, how do you have any thoughts about how you would convince somebody to go that route, besides maybe this is an academic paper on
I mean I've got a bunch of anecdotal evidence, and for me, the strongest anecdotal evidence is the company that I created and the company that I ran. That's exactly how we did it. I never had a backlog. Never, ever had a backlog. Never did any type of prioritization. Never did any of that stuff. It's like whenever something finished, I'd have a quick conversation with the team. It's like, okay, based on what we just learned, what makes sense is the next thing that we should pull in, right? And like on the spot there, we would create a story or whatever and pull it in.
Yeah, that's fascinating.
And so I hear all of these, again, I hear all these techniques about, how you should manage backlogs and how you should prioritize them and how you should order them. And I'm like, what? Why? Because like you're saying, you spend more time doing that than you do actual work. And it's like, is that really where your customers want you to invest your time and money?
Yeah. And you know what's funny about that is I'm reflecting on my planning practice over time, over my 15-year career. And I think early on, the emphasis on planning techniques was higher. And now, so just uncritically, like if you threw me in a room now and said, okay, help these people plan and prioritize, it's almost like what you said. Sure, whatever, let's do it. Like whatever you people want to do. Because if you're right that it is random, is better than anything else, let's do something and then we'll learn from it, And so after we do the first piece of it tomorrow, we'll get back together maybe and then plan the next thing, And so we'll learn from what we did, And so it reminds me of Kent Beck's quote on planning, which says, "We'll make the plan quickly and cheaply, so there'll be little inertia when we must change it." Right. And I think most businesses think of, hey, what's the 6-month plan I can make that's first surefire that will generate millions, right? And so it's kind of like it's like the opposite paradigm of that, right?
So sure, let's spend weeks coming up with a 6-month plan that is going to be invalid the very first day of the project, right? That makes sense. But that's why I think it's so important to come back to talking about the language of bets, talking about the language of experimentation, right? Each item that we're working on, it's a bet, it's an experiment, right? And so we need to find out, was that bet successful? Did the results of the experiment match the hypothesis that we had? That's, I think, the language that we really need to start using.
Nice. Yeah. And I think common sense will probably jump in a little bit, right? It's not like you're going to be like, hey, we're going to make something completely invaluable tomorrow. I mean, maybe you would learn from that as well, I guess. But I think people will generally do something that's within a ballpark of something reasonable for a product development organization to do. But
well, I mean, think about, I mean, given the time, I don't know if we should be dating ourselves here, but we just passed the 3-year anniversary of the beginning of the pandemic, and think about on March 1st, 2020, how many 6-month or year plans were out there that immediately got trashed, It's like, and that kind of, I'm not saying the pandemics happen every year, but there's certainly things that are going to happen like that. That happen. We're starting to see some uncertainty in the banking sector. Customers at SVB, when they woke up on Monday morning, it was like, whoa, wait a second, So that kind of stuff that happens all the time. So it's a fallacy to say that we gain certainty or that we drive out risk by planning. And the truth is, you don't drive out risk by planning; you drive out risk by doing.
Yeah.
Nice. So maybe to switch topics slightly, so we've been talking quite a bit about predictability and forecasting. Is how does this all tie into Kanban in your mind? So I guess when I hear the word Kanban, what comes to mind either is like the manufacturing floor. Where I remember the first time a process engineer or manufacturing engineer showed me what Kanban meant in manufacturing versus software, and I'm like, oh wow, it's physically a thing, in a queue, and so but for software, it's like the to do, doing, done kind of thing. How does this all tie into Kanban for you?
So for me, one of the best ways to achieve predictability, and Austin, you were actually talking about this before, whether you knew it or not, you were talking about it. One of the best ways to come up with predictability, to build a predictable system is to manage this thing called flow, right? So when you talk about, I got in a team and we were delivering every day and all this stuff, and it's like, our customers felt predictability. What they're really feeling was flow. That's what they were really feeling. So if you care about predictability, one of the best ways to achieve predictability is to manage this thing called flow. And for me, what Kanban is, again, in 25 words or less, is just a strategy to optimize flow. That's how we talk about what are some things that we can do to optimize flow. And that strategy will involve certain tactics and practices. It will involve things like, hey, let's limit the number of things we're working on at a given time, a la mob or ensemble programming, right? Let's visualize our work so we can see where there are potential problems in our process. Let's track certain metrics so we can measure the health and performance of our process. And maybe the data can tell us where we've got problems and things like that. So there are certain practices and certain tactics that will help us to optimize flow. And Kanban, like I said, my broad definition of Kanban is what are those set of practices that will help us to optimize flow.
Oh, interesting. Yeah. And I don't know if I've ever, tied it directly to flow before. So that's kind of a light bulb moment for me. Yeah, I mean, obviously it is related to flow, right? Because if, let's say, you take a team and you say, hey, you have a work in progress of 1, right? or whatever, or do something like that, it's going to change the flow. Okay, cool. What are some of those practices that come to mind? Maybe a concrete practice that maybe your go-to practice there.
So, I mean, there are honestly, I can name all 3 very quickly. The 3 fundamental ones that make up Kanban. The first one is you have to have some definition of what your workflow is. You have to have a well-defined start point, well-defined endpoint, and how work is flowing between those points, and then that work should be visualized somewhere. So that's kind of practice number 1: define and visualize your work. Number 2, now once you've got that, is as items are moving through your process, are you actively managing those items? So things like, we don't want to let an item get stuck in a column arbitrarily anywhere. I should say stuck in a state of the workflow anywhere. If it's blocked, what are we doing to unblock it? If it's aging unnecessarily, what can we do to prevent it from aging? So there's some active management of those items. It's not just, oh, hey, we put up a Kanban board and magically flow happens. That's not how it works, right? So, and then the last one is based on those first 2. how do we understand where we spot improvements, and how do we improve our process, over time? So define and visualize a workflow, actively manage items in the workflow, improve the workflow. Those are the three big components of Kanban at a very, very high level, right?
Yeah. So you have predictability, you have Kanban, you have kind of the combination of the two. What anything else that you'd add on top of those, like, as far as like a direction that you'd go? So I think you're kind of getting from like the higher level down farther. Any other thoughts like around any of that?
Yeah, I mean, if you're really wanting to start, if anyone out there has never really played around with flow, and you're really wanting to get your feet wet, the place, and I always say this, I mean, because I can give what I think is very, very hands-on, very simple way to get started. The place that I would start is to look at a flow metric called work item aging. And we have a Kanban guide published, and there's a lot of information out there if you go look up work item aging. But it's this idea of, as items are moving through your process, they are aging. And not that aging is necessarily bad, because things have to age as they go through your process. The question is, how much age is too much age? And the only way we can answer that question is if we're actually tracking it and we're actually looking at it. And you'd be surprised, both you, Austin, and Chris, and you, the wider audience, would be surprised how much information is encapsulated just in that one metric of work item age. Just the conversations that can be sparked just by looking at that. It's like, hey, look, all of our stories usually take 3 or 4 days to get done, but this one's been on our board for 33 days. What's going on here? So that's honestly, fundamentally, that's where I start. Every other, I think people think I'm exaggerating, I think, when I say this, but pretty much every other practice of flow can be derived from the first principle of just look at aging.
So that makes a lot of sense to me, and that it really starting to connect the dots for me in kind of the lean world, where the waste of excess inventory, right? And so a light bulb moment within the last 5 years for me was realizing that until it's providing value to a user, it's excess inventory from a lean waste. Like if we had a physical manufacturing floor, it's stuff sitting on the floor, not generating value for anybody, right?
And not only is that inventory costing us money, but it's perishable. So the two best ways to prevent items from aging, the two best ways to prevent inventory building up on the factory floor is, number one, finish it, right? Or number two, don't start it. And so if you think about it, if we're focused on finishing and focused on not starting, we've just backed into the concept of controlling work in progress, right? Right. So right. And okay. And like I said, we can just kind of go down from there. Yeah.
Gotcha. Yeah. And it's cool to think about it. Like you said, it fundamentally gets down to that. And I think as I look at work that I'm currently involved in, or I look at the work of others, I think you're right. Like that if you were to pick one thing that says the most information, right? If you just know that one thing, you know a lot about what's going on of the flow of that system, right? Right.
Yeah.
If the answer is 6 months versus 1 day, like that your brain just starts to fill in the gaps of like what their process is, right?
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. At least you could start asking some questions. There might be very, very good reasons why that thing is
right.
But are we at least asking the question and having that conversation, or did this thing just get forgotten about and ignored, or something like that? So
And Chris, I think the one you add to it, I don't think you called it work item aging, but I think you just talk about I think it's like bug defects and then delivery, right?
Cycle time. So
right.
The traditional DORA metrics, right? I guess they've become tradition fairly recently. But mean time recovery, cycle time, all those things. But like, I like the idea of this of just work item aging, because it's if a team has like a single item WIP and and that team has been stuck for a very long time, like something's maybe fundamentally broken. Examples that I can think of, like, is even like whole group portions of the team that were working on it go on vacation, and work goes down to a crawl while they're on vacation. And you can kind of see that right away. It's like, oh, well, why didn't we just have somebody like back them up while they were gone? And so then that one's a really easy one to just let it fly, because it's like, oh, it's their responsibility, it'll be on them when they get back. But it never really should be that, right? And so like one of our lofty goals in our department is 0 silos. Anyone can take a vacation at any time. And if you look at work item aging, and your aging is affected by a vacation or sick leave or whatever, like that's an indicator that there's room for improvement for sure, at the very least.
Well, yeah, and I mean, to me, that would hopefully very quickly lead to a policy of, if you know you have a vacation coming up,
yeah,
and you're about ready to start something, and you don't have a reasonable expectation of being able to finish this thing before you go on vacation, go help somebody else out, right? Don't pull something new in.
Yeah,
go help out something else, or maybe go do some type of improvement activity, or whatever. That, because that gets to the waste to Austin that you were talking about. If we pull it in, we don't get it done, and you go on vacation, and like Chris, you're saying there's a silo and nobody else can pick it up. Well, now we've just wasted all that work.
Yeah.
And all that.
Yeah. And I think I like your hypothesis, and maybe I'll give one friendly challenge to it, Daniel, which was, it all comes down to work item aging. I would be tempted to add some sort of quality to that, or defects or something to that, right? Because you can imagine a team that delivers something to production every day, or 10 things to production every day, but they're just, making a terrible customer experience or something, right? And so you were saying that work item aging, everything else could be derived from that. Is there, how would quality or defects tie into that, I guess?
Great question. I love the challenge, by the way. If I may, you're making an assumption. I think you're making an assumption. Correct me if I'm wrong, but you're making an assumption that the clock stops when something goes to production. And I would say, if what you really care about is quality, the clock doesn't stop when it gets to production. The clock stops once that quality has been verified, or value has been verified, or whatever. Yeah, that's when the clock stops.
I see.
So, but what I would say, Austin, is, I mean, for a lot of teams, maybe that's an easy place to start. Let's just start with measuring until we get to production. But then we can start talking about the things like you're saying, Austin. But we're still suffering from quality. Well, okay, how do we address these quality issues? How can our metrics help inform some of these quality issues? And that's how we would tweak over time.
At the very least, having the clock start again when you realize that the quality wasn't there is a good,
whatever that policy is, whatever helps us to highlight that. Like I said, I asked the question.
And I think that really helps a lot. I had some recently, me and a few others did a talk on getting things done, and someone objected very strongly on social media to it, because we were asked to speak, and it was like a theme of talks about getting things done, and it was something like done doesn't matter. But I think they're correct if their definition of done is like what you said, as soon as it's out there, right? Or
works on my machine.
Works on my machine, that kind of thing, right? Yeah, exactly. But if done is more of an outcome, customer with value, without major defects or something like that, then the aging is all that matters. If that's how you're defining the aging ceasing, right? I suppose, right? Yeah. Okay. All right. I think you convinced me.
I know, but I may. No, like I said, I want everybody, and this is invitation again for everybody out there. Keep the challenges coming, because I think I still think there are better ways to think about this stuff. But
cool.
Yeah. Well, this was a very good conversation, and covered a lot of great topics. I just wanted to ask, is there anything that you want to plug or share before we close out the show?
Yeah, so if anybody is interested in learning more about Kanban, we just a couple of years ago, we started a community called prokanban.org. So prokanban.org. That should be your one-stop shop for everything Kanban. If you're just starting out on your flow journey, please come check us out. We want to create a safe, diverse, inclusive community for people to learn about this stuff. So many years, Kanban has not had that type of community. So if you're interested, come check us out. And just for fun, if you're interested, Pratik Singh, I mentioned Pratik before. Pratik Singh and I have a YouTube channel that we call Drunk Agile, where we just get around, we drink, and we complain about stuff. So nice. Usually related to Agile. So if that's your thing, then please come join us there too, and drop us a line, maybe drop us some questions. Austin and Chris probably should have you, if you're whiskey drinkers, we probably should have you on that as well.
I can be convinced.
Yeah.
I see. I really have to twist your arm there.
Right.
Yeah. Sounds good.
Alrighty. Well, yeah. So with that, to our audience, if you know somebody that maybe has some things in their backlog aging a little bit too long and are starting to smell a little fermented, or maybe somebody who's struggling with predictability and talking about metrics and story points, then you can share this episode with them, and be sure to like, subscribe, ring the bell, and share on social media and all that. And then thank you, Daniel, for being on the show with us, and to our audience, we'll see you all next time. Bye, everybody.
Thanks to both of you. Thanks to everybody else for joining. Appreciate the opportunity to be here. Thank you.